Hi, welcome to Champagne Sharks, episode 20, The ManNot with Dr. Tommy J. Curry. Hey, how's it going? This is episode 20 of Champagne Sharks, and we are here with a very special guest, Dr. Tommy Curry, professor at... Actually, you know what? I'm going to let you introduce yourself.
Fantastic. So my name is Dr. Tommy J. Curry. I am currently a professor of philosophy at Texas A&M University. Much of my work revolves around critical race theory and Africana philosophy, but my passion resides in Black male studies. So a lot of the work that I've done recently, which is evidenced by my recent book, The ManNot, Race, Class, Genre, and the Dilemmas of Black Manhood, focuses on the suffering and oppression that Black men suffer under as both raced as Black and sexed as male. So a lot of my current research is looking at things like intimate partner violence and intimate partner homicide of Black men, where they're the primary victims, the rape of Black men and boys. We just finished a piece. My co-author, Dr. Ebony Utley, has been wonderful in helping research and conduct studies on the statutory rape and sexual abuse of young Black boys. We've done several publications. Dr. William A. Smith, the developer and originator of racial battle fatigue, has done some wonderful work on misandric microaggressions. So there's lots of different coordinations between scholars, or rather I should say collaborations between scholars that are trying to get to a more empirically informed concept of Black men and Black boys in this country.
And I wanted to let you know, Dr. Curry, because I'm a longtime fan of your work. I was trying to get you on the show for a while. I was not even aware of your recent controversy. I had actually realized how bad it had gotten after you already agreed to be on the show. I don't want to make you talk about it too much, but it had to do with conservatives, and you're not the only one. There have been several kind of witch hunts of professors. What would you like to share about that in a general sense, not just about yourself, but just about how it's been going with professors in general, and where you think this recent witch hunt is coming from?
Well, a few things about that. So for those of you who don't know, I was attacked by Rod Dreher, who is a blogger with a bachelor's degree in journalism, who believes that he can have an audience with tenured Black professors on nothing more beyond, with nothing to bring to the table beyond his accusations. So a podcast I did in 2012 on Django Unchained resurfaced because it had a provocative title called I think it was titled something like Killing White People or Killing White People in Context. And, you know, Rod Dreher, he says that somebody complained about me, so he went and looked me up. He went fishing for something and chose this podcast. Basically, the podcast argues that Jamie Foxx's articulation of Django Unchained, which is where he made this comment saying that he enjoyed being able to kill the white people who enslaved Black people, and that it was a fantasy of his. He got a lot of flack from that. So basically, he made a comment about revolutionary violence and how white people who enslaved Black people or Africans deserved it, and how that was a fantasy. And my point was to say, well, listen, yes, it's a fantasy, but it also happened, right? There were slave uprisings. There have been long conversations about the use of armed resistance and militancy in fighting for Black civil rights. And one of the things that I pointed out is that in this tradition, there have been black people who have believed wholeheartedly that the only way that black people could get free is if some white people died. And this argument was advanced by people like Ida B. Wells and Robert F. Williams because they suggested that white people who fundamentally believed in the notion of white superiority and white supremacy would never trade their white superior lives for black inferior lives. So this is a calculation that black people can use in trying to defend themselves against mob violence, lynching, and the KKK. So, of course, Rod Dreher, being the white supremacist that he is, took that line out of context, suggested I was advocating killing white people, despite the fact that the whole segment is about black self-defense and the history of black militancy, and suggested somehow that I'm some radical that's running loose by the lips, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Most recently, he published a piece in response to the Chronicle article suggesting that, well, because 10 years ago when I was a grad student, I wrote a piece about revolutionary violence, that this is truly what I believe, and that, I'm inciting children in my classes to go out and kill white people. It's nonsensical. My work primarily revolves around militancy. I pretty much write about Ida B. Wells, T. Thomas Fortune, and Robert F. Williams and their philosophies of self-defense. The last article I published actually in this area was with a white undergraduate student on Robert F. Williams and preemptive self-defense. So, this is conservatives and the alt-right trying to demonize a young black male professor because it's in vogue right now. The idea that black men are violent, the idea that black men are militants, the idea that black men are trying to stamp out and threaten the white race has been part of the racist trope in America for centuries on end. So that's not going to end anytime soon. But I think what's most important about this kind of controversy is two things. The first being that it really does expose the kinds of racist machinations within research universities in this country, namely that places like Texas A&M are taking this kind of stuff seriously. This story hasn't broken on any legitimate journalistic source. It's been confined to alt-right and white supremacist websites. So the fact that a major research university even believes that this is legitimate, that we have to take white supremacists seriously, is a joke to me. The second thing, however, though, is that the empowerment of this kind of public, now the alt-right and white supremacists are in fact a public that universities are taking seriously, means that black scholars and other white liberals or leftists who are speaking about race and the history of racism easily become targets. So when you look around the country, you see several different professors being targeted for tweets that they've made or for Facebook posts that they've shared. And this is just another way to intimidate and silence people who are fighting against racism. So under Trump and under the kind of ethno-nationalist backlash that we had to Obama, we can see a shift in public consciousness. We can see that white supremacists now have a forum, that they're in the public square, and that it's actually becoming quite dangerous for people of color.
Yes, and what you said is actually something I was about to bring up. I was catching up on the controversy through a Chronicle article, and two things that jumped out at me. Both, I was shocked at the extent to which Dreher was entertained, like the type of moral equivalency that he was given. Almost like it blew my mind, because anyone who has listened to you speak or read your work, your scholarship is very thorough.
Thank you.
Layer footnotes and references very, very thoroughly. And when people even see your pedigree and your history debating, and then this guy who's just I've read about Dreher and I just still don't understand why he's so popular, but it reinforces this idea that as a black man, you have to be so thorough and you're still not equivalent to even the most random white man with the least credentials and overt history of white supremacist transgressions.
Absolutely. I mean, Dreher is going to pull a white public that's fearful of black men. I mean, I think that his interview in the Chronicle where he exposes that he shuddered when black men passed him by because he was so scared they would do violence to him. I mean, this is indicative of a history of racial bias and racial antipathy. And as I say in my work, this is indicative of a kind of anti-black misandry, a fear and hatred of black men. And the fact that he just communicates this to people so easily really does suggest that he's a racist. And what's funny to me about this, but what's funny about this is, you got to think. I mean, the guy's already been proven wrong by every major journalistic or reputable journalistic outlet that covers higher education. And he's still trying to persist. He's like, well, look at this article he publishes when he was 24 or 25 years old. I'm like, really, this is, if he understood anything about academia, he would understand that sometimes you ask questions to explore whether or not these things are possible, right? That if I'm asking the question about whether or not they should be revolutionary violence or should there be a more robust sense of self-defense, I'm asking the question to wage an argument to decide what's the strongest case. That doesn't mean that I have to advocate revolutionary violence. Said differently, if someone says, well, let's talk about war, just war. Do we have a right to wage a war against the Middle East? And you ask this in a philosophy class under just war theory. That doesn't mean that they advocate war in the Middle East, right? But the problem is when a black male says this, when a black professor says this, you say that there is no intellectual function of such questions. It's only politics or it's only racial hate or aversion. And again, I anticipated all this in my article, the pieces that he's just then, quote. I'm saying, look, for people to ask a question, for black people, specifically for a black man to ask a question about whether or not revolutionary violence is needed after a catastrophe like Katrina and histories of racial discrimination is going to be met with fear and paranoia by some whites. But those whites are racist because they ask these questions in everyday situations. You ask this question in social contract theory. You ask these questions in war or military ethics. You ask these questions in basic classes about ethics and self-defense. The only difference is when you apply to a racial context, people suggest that it's out of bounds because you're talking about the lives of white people, as if black people don't deal with the unjust killing of their own race on a daily basis. So, I don't really take him seriously. I mean, the guy only has a bachelor's degree, so he clearly is not familiar with how academic prose and academic work, articles, peer review work is actually done. So he's a conservative white man that has an axe to grind against liberals, who thinks he's the most oppressed group because of his Christian origins, his Catholicism, and he's certainly within bounds to express that opinion. But insofar as he actually believes that there's a commentary worth having with him about work and tradition that he doesn't understand, I'm beyond that. And I think that it's indicative of the kind of racism that exists in this country, where I'm somehow expected as a professor at a research institution to lower myself to debate with bloggers simply on the assertion that they're just as intelligent than I am. That may very well be the case as him as an individual, but he doesn't have the hours put in yet to have this kind of argument with me. And if he chose to, he could certainly submit it to a peer-reviewed publication. I'll be happy to debate it with him then.
And this is the last thing I'm going to say about that, because I don't want to dwell on it too long, but there's a certain disingenuousness about him pretending that he doesn't understand about posing questions for the purpose of exploring and answering them. Because, I mean, this is a tradition that goes back to Plato in his works when he's discussing Socrates. And these conservatives do that all the time when, they always pull the just asking questions card when
of course
it's time to talk about, hey, are black people latent rapists? Are they inherently genetically stupid? Do they have genetic propensities to crime? Hey, we're just asking questions.
Right, we're just doing research, right? We're just asking the academic question. I mean, look, that's what this is smoke and mirrors, right? Yeah, I mean, he has a reactionary white public under Trump that's going to be fearful. They're going to buy into the idea that white people are the most vulnerable and the most endangered group in America, that affirmative action and diversity means the extinction of the white race. He already has that. And, he's going, of course, like any white conservative, he's going to deny this because he's going to say, well, I'm not a white supremacist. Yeah, but when you look at who picks up your stories, they're all alt-right and white supremacists, right? Your stories are shared and endorsed by people who, that is your public, right? They're endorsed by people who believe these things. When you look at when you track these things, when you track how his stories and his work is being shared, especially in regard to me and other professors. He's attacked a few of my colleagues as well. You see that that's the people who are trying to endorse his view, right? The Daily Stormer, the Daily Caller, Amaranth. Right? These are clear white supremacist sites. So. InfoWars, another white supremacist site. So, when you have people who think that, human gorilla hybrids are the threat to Western civilization, there's no reason to argue with these people. This is the quality of the intellectual debates that you're going to get from white supremacists. And while Dreyer may try to separate himself from that under the guise of paleoconservatism or whatever he wants to call himself, or, his conservative views, that's not really fooling anyone. Right. The guy has clear racial biases. And I think, for instance, that is why he's choosing to pick on me. It's an easy target. He has issues with black men. He's admitted he has issues and fears of black men.
Yes, overtly.
I'm a black man. Yeah, he's overtly said it, right? So he has fears of black men. He wants to tackle black men. So he's gonna ride this out as long as he can.
And to tie it into the title of your book, I think this is a good segue. The reason why I think that he can quote unquote get it when it's time for, Plato talking about Socrates just asking questions, or when it's time for a race scientist, I say scientist in quotation marks, like Charles Murray, to be just asking questions, is because to them, a white man is a human. He's a man.
Absolutely.
So he's using his intellect, but because as a black man, you're not quite a man, you're not quite an animal. When you ask the questions, you're reacting to impulse. You can't ask the question just as an abstraction. You must be just getting ready to incite a riot, like
violent. Exactly. I'm just primal rage.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, this is what I'm saying, right? The whole aspect, reeks of the kind of racism that black men and black people generally, but more so black men, just because of how they're stereotyped, have to endure in this country. So the idea that I can't ask intelligent questions, the idea that somehow I'm intellectually immature, that I'm just trying to incite people, none of these things have anything to do with facts. It's not even an option
that you're going to intellectually explore this with, real academic rigor.
Yeah, I mean, for them, it's like, oh, he writes a paper about violence, and and then it's just a sophomoric effort, right? I mean, evidently, some conservatives came into my classes and they spliced some tapes, and it is ironic. I mean, here's the funny part: at the beginning of every class, when we start talking about violence, I literally have this speech that I've written into my notes, or that I just remember to say every class is when we start the chapters. I say, listen, this is a conservative university, so we know there are going to be people who are going to say that Dr. Curry is saying kill white people. But that's not the argument. The argument is that revolutionary violence is self-defense. So I have this whole spiel to prime the students to understand exactly what we're talking about. So you had somebody come in, they've clearly spliced that section, right, of the talk. And they're saying, oh, well, Curry's advocating violence. And you can actually listen to the splices where I'm saying George Jackson argues, right? Or Fanon argues. And they're like, well, do you think violence is? I was like, well, in this situation or in this context, if we assume, racism is permanent, then yes, the only way that you're going to get any kind of change is the destruction of the dominant class, or the removal of white people, or the killing of white people, or revolution. Those types of things are said in all kinds of different ways when you're lecturing to people. So the idea that these are somehow taken as personal opinions rather than reflections on text or within the context of a certain discussion is just silly to me. But this is what the alt-right has to do. They have to make people, black people, leftists, liberals, skills. They have to make people seem as if they're incompetent. They have to make people seem as they're purely rhetorical. And that's just not going to work in this case. Like I said, I mean, the work I do on militant self-defense, I think I've published 4 or 5 articles. At this point, I've published over 60. So that's not even 1% of, or 10% of the work that I've done, especially if you count the books that I do on a general and regular basis. So, I think we need to be very clear about what their agenda is. They're trying to pull something from basically 10% of a career to make that seem as if it represents everything and anything that I think about on a constant basis.
And I want to talk about, this is a good time to link it to the title of your book, because the same way we said that you can't be a man who's using the full capability of his mind, I think that ties into the title of your book, which is called The ManNot. And can you explain what a ManNot is?
Absolutely. When you look at history, you find that black men have always been put in the position that they're not human and not man. In our traditional gender frames, and when I say our traditional gender frames, I'm talking largely about intersectionality and black feminism, because those kinds of ideas, those concepts, seem to have the copyright on black masculinity in our present orders of knowledge in the university. Black men are just lumped into the male category. And because they're male, they're assumed to have the same kinds of privileges or powers that white men have, albeit because of race, they have a smaller number of those privileges and powers. But nonetheless, they're held to that standard. What I'm trying to show in my book is that's not the case, that when you look at the people who actually invented concepts that are deployed by intersectionality theorists, such as hegemonic masculinity, there is a difference between ruling class hegemonic males and subordinate males. So when Raywon Connell makes these arguments about hegemonic or toxic masculinity, what she's actually saying is, there are ruling class, or in this case, white men, upper class white men, and then there are a whole bunch of subordinate masculinities, poor working class white men, ethnic groups, racial groups, right? All the men of those groups are subordinate. And in that world, in that grouping of subordinate males, these people don't seek to imitate patriarchy. They, in fact, resist patriarchy. Now, they can certainly take up some of the ideologies of the society, but that does not mean that they simply wholesale buy into the ideas of Western patriarchy or hegemonic masculinity. So when I talk about the ManNot, what I am suggesting is that there's a negation of black men such that they are a subset within subordinate masculinities. And because of that, they're dehumanized, they're oppressed, they're raped, they're victims of violence, they're victims of genocide, they're victims of all kinds of, painful and unmentioned horrors and terrors for the last 2 centuries in this country that rarely get any attention or mentioned in the scholarly record. So the ManNot situates black males in their relational position to whites and to even their female counterparts in the United States.
Now, what you said, right? You know how we were talking about how you can just ask questions about anything when it comes to black men? And
yes.
What you just said is an example of something that you almost can't bring up in this modern climate. Like, you can bring up about black male criminality, you can bring up black genetic IQ, but what you just said, I guarantee you I'm going to get a lot of pushback on it. So I'm going to play devil's advocate a little bit to anticipate, some of the things I'm going to hear, because in this modern media and academic climate, it's more taboo to say that black men aren't latent rapists, that they aren't terrorizers of black women in the community, that they aren't just rampant misogynists kind of ruling the black community with the iron fist. So I'm going to put forward to you some of the arguments that I hear all the time on Twitter, just because I know that pushback is going to come. So I've always said black men there is no black patriarchy because patriarchy is a system of power. You have to have access to power, political patronage, to influence, and black men don't have that. And then people will respond to me with things like the black power in the civil rights movement. That's the first argument I always get. They say, oh, black men centered themselves in the civil rights movement, in the black power movement, oppressed the women working in the black power movement, took credit for them. And then another thing that I like to bring up is the infamous Stokely Carmichael / Kwame Ture quote about a woman in the movement's only role is, or position is, prone. So what would you say to that talking point?
Well, I think there's a lot of things to say to that talking point. Let's begin with the first issue of whether or not black men centered themselves. Yes, black men did center themselves in the Black Power movement initially. And the reason for that is because Black Power was a response to many of the kinds of disenfranchisements and violences that we had in a society that predominantly affected men at that time. So when you're talking about some of the same issues that you get in Robert F. Williams, which were black men being accused of rape, black men being lynched, black men being unemployed, it was a movement that grew from the experience of black men. But when you look at the things that Kathleen Cleaver said, for instance, where she was actually defending the evolution of the Black Panther Party, she suggested that, look, when you're talking about a militant organization, and she was comparing it to Black Lives Matter, you have to look at the history of the development of armed black men in this society. She says, look, black men had fought in wars. Black men were part of military. So black men came back with a kind of knowledge about guns and about warfare that was being waged across seas, and they applied that to the domestic situation. So it's not out of the realm of possibility that black men took a lead in this kind of armed militant movement. When you look at some of the work that's been done by journalists like Linda Lumsden, I mean, she's actually done a study of the development of the gender consciousness of the Black Power movement, specifically the Black Panthers, looking at their magazine or looking at their publication, The Black Panther. And she says, listen, in the first issue, you're absolutely right. Like 65, 66, most of the issues are talking about a strong manhood. They're talking about black men being leaders. But she says, as time evolved, literally within the next year, 66, 67, 67, 68, you see they take up women's rights issues because these are conversations that are happening alongside the civil rights movement that people are paying attention to. And these are debates within the Black Power movement. Again, you have Kathleen Cleaver making the exact same kind of argument where she says that the Black Panther Party was looking at things dialectically. And when the issue came about, they started debating these things within their ranks. So we have to look at things within their context. Even black women at the time didn't know their place within political parties. And this actually brings us to the Stokely Carmichael quote, right? Where he makes this claim that the only position for women in the SNCC is prone. There's two things that really need to be said about that. One is that claim was about a position paper. And the position paper was supposed to be anonymous, but they were discussing it at one of their annual retreats. And the question of the position paper was, what is the role of women in the SNCC? It was authored by two women. The two women that authored that paper were Mary King and Casey Hayden. And what's interesting about this is that you can actually read what their response is to. So Mary King writes this autobiography called Freedom Song. It was a personal story of the 1960s civil rights movement. And she says, look, Stokely used to make fun of everything. He was a jokester. He was constantly ridiculing things. And she actually recounts that, look, when he made this comment, it was to lighten the mood. She said that, he threw his head back and he was roaring with laughter, and everybody did as well. And that because of that, they actually, after he lightened the mood, because this was a position paper questioning the SNCC, they actually discussed the role of women. And she says, to the contrary of how our black feminist historiography is reading Carmichael, Chronicle, that he actually supported women's rights. And when you look at Casey Hayden, in 2010, she wrote a letter, that was a recollection of her time in the SNCC. And she said the same thing. She was like, she looked at SNC as a womanist and nurturing, familiar organization that was not sexist, that mixed the best of women's culture and black culture. So again, these are the two women that he made the comment to, saying that that's not the intention. That's not how people reacted to it. And it broke the ice so that they could have a rich discussion in the SNC meeting about the role of women. And what's interesting is in Mary King's autobiography, she actually says that nobody knew what the answer was. That she wrote the paper not with a demand for not black women, because she was a white woman, but what women should do, but to ask the question that they should do more than simply what they've always done in every other movement. And she says Stokely was open to that. The problem that I have with a lot of the gender critiques that are waged today is they keep pretending that it was all figured out. So they're pretending in the 1940s and 50s, when black people were still trying to fight Jim Crow, that black women somehow knew that they wanted to be the face of every organization. And evidently they knew this before black men knew this, because you can see black men debating about what they should do about this as well, because this is the first time that black men are trying to take a lead and announce themselves as men to a world that says that they're not men. So there's, as with any time period, there's always questions to be asked about what's the right way to do things. But the way we read these things backward is like, oh, black women should be at in these leadership positions. Well, I think that's nonsensical, because in the 1940s, 50s, and 60s, heck, even in the 1970s, what you're dealing with is a deliberate government program to kill the leaders of black movements. So are we literally saying, and I challenge, my classes with this question as well. Are we saying that if history would have been written where black women were in charge of these leadership positions and black men stood to the side, and all the government, all these white supremacists killed these black women, we would read black men as being progressive? Absolutely not. We would read black men as being cowards.
Yes, it's
right.
True.
We would read black men as being cowards who didn't step up to protect their wives and families. And then when you had small groups of black men who did that, be it SNCC, be it the Black Panther Party, be it the, Black Armed Guard or the Deacons for Defense, now we call those people patriarchs. In a world where people like Robert F. Williams started the Black Armed Guard and militant self-defense strategies or militant civil rights strategies precisely because he couldn't convict white men for raping black women. So we read things backwards. We demonize people based on how they fit into our story and our politics. And then we pretend that that's our accurate reading of history, that that's the only reading of history that's possible. And it's not intellectually rigorous. It's not academically honest. It's basically us projecting what we want to find wrong with black men during that period of time. This is a very tumultuous time. This is a very confusing time. This is an uncertain and indeterminate time. And I'm not saying that excuses anything that somebody thinks anybody at that time can or did not do. But at the same time, you can't demonize somebody 60 years later for not holding the politics of theories that weren't even invented yet. There was no intersectionality to be developed. Even Angela Davis and Gloria Joseph, they consider themselves black feminists, certainly now, but they were using socialism. They were using Marxism. There was no intersectionality.
Wait, but Dr. Curry, I've been told online that Harriet Tubman was an intersectional feminist. According to Twitter, Fannie Lou Hamer, Ella Baker, basically, since the slave ship, they were intersectional feminists. That's basically...
Yeah, well, that's not true. Come on. Look, so, this is the problem of us reading theories backwards, right? So, if we're going to think that black people who hadn't even mastered the notion of gender yet, in the Western context, right? And this is why I study 19th century ethnology. When black people were considered to be savage races. They, you can see this in Gail Biederman's work. You can see this in Louise Newman's work. You can see this in my work. Black people weren't thought to yet have evolved gender yet. Right. So if you were a savage race, you were a feminine race, you didn't have a gender. If you were a white race, you were civilized and patriarchal. That's why you developed gender. And one of the criticisms that you can see even in the 19th century that white women and white suffragists made against black men was that they were savages and that they mistreated their women because they let them do the same kind of work that they did. Louise Newman has a great chapter, I think it's chapter 2 in her book, White Women's Rights, where she talks about the criticism that white people had of black people, of the Negro race. And the argument that white people waged against was that they were too sexually egalitarian. In other words, they said that these savage races are too equal between the genders because they do the exact same kind of tasks. Women do the work that men do the work that women do. So this is evidence of their savagery. The mark of civilization was sexual inegalitarianism. In other words, because there were sexual differences in roles for groups of men and women in the white race, that's what made them civilized, because they said that's what makes man different and superior to woman. That's what makes woman morally superior to man. So, you know, this is what I mean when I talk about the revisionism of a lot of this gender theory, is that we've taken gender to be a universal category and we've made race just a biological or cultural trait. And then we've just imposed that theoretical view on everything that's happened from, you know, the 1770s forward. There's a reason that people like Wollstonecraft spoke about women as slaves. If they were intersectional, why not speak about women as women? Right?
Yes.
The reason you don't do that is because there was no notion of women being oppressed outside of the concept of the slave, which is built on the black body. It's the same reason that in 1944, Ava Myrtle makes the argument that it says a parallel problem to the Negro problem. Why? Because she was saying that women were treated just like Negroes. In 1951, the reason that Hacking wrote an article called Women as Minority Category and compared them to black people is because they had to figure out how woman was the same thing as other racial and ethnic groups that had historically been oppressed, like blacks and Jews. So the whole concept of woman has historically been built on the category of the Negro/slave. And to suggest differently is just a misreading of history and a dishonesty in the category. So there's no way that you had a concept of being both black and woman that was separate from the condition of slavery or mother. Those terms simply did not exist within the cultural lexicon of the 19th century.
And something that happens, I notice, is there seems to be a very lax standard for when an intersectional feminist wants to write something about race and gender in a prestige publication. Like, they can just basically put anything in there and it gets taken as gospel, and the white liberal editors or owners of these publications don't question it and just goes into the record as fact. I've seen articles in all types of white-owned publications, respected publications, with the lineage of intersectional feminism, and they will go back to even Ida B. Wells and make her seem like she was a gender warrior against black men, and that she self-identified as a feminist. And I would like you to talk about Ida B. Wells and the idea of her as being in the lineage of intersectional feminism.
Yeah, listen, I honestly, you know, I don't know what these things mean, in the sense that if they mean feminism by women who did civil rights work, then okay, sure, but that's not exactly what feminism meant at the turn of the century. Feminism was a very conservative argument. It was a very imperial argument. You have Melise McDougall in 1935 actually saying that no black woman joined feminism besides for Sojourner Truth. Right. And once you see the debates in 1867 about black men trying to get the right to vote, you understand why. Right. Because Sojourner Truth believed that black men would oppress black women, which was a major argument that was advocated by people like Susan B. Anthony, Phoebe Coates, and Elizabeth Cady Stanton during the debates about the 15th Amendment. So there's a lot of history there that goes into it. So if I'm, you know, given the work I do, I don't argue that any black women during that period of time were feminists in the sense that they align with the suffragist movement or what we consider to be first or second wave feminism. On the other hand, if we're talking about black women being political, black women having a consciousness about womanhood, a consciousness about race, a consciousness about black politics, then absolutely. Right. And I think that, you know, Paula Giddings' book, Where and Where We Enter, even though she does call these women feminists, you know, she doesn't exclude black men from that. Right. Because she's saying that most of the black men during this period of time would be feminists as well. We look at Martha S. Jones's work. She calls black men and black women feminists, but she's like, here's what I mean by the term. I'm talking about people who are pro-woman, people who are fighting for suffrage rights, civil rights, race rights, things of this sort. So the term has had a general meaning that I think confuses the nuances of what white suffragists were doing during that period of time. And I think that because black men have overwhelmingly supported women's rights, be it Purvis or Frederick Douglass, this becomes a kind of general term that overlooks the specificity of what black men did politically in the 19th century and isolates everything to gender. But given the work that I do, because I study ethnology, I'm very familiar with what white women were doing during this period of time. I'm very familiar with what they debated in the 1848 Seneca Falls meeting and what they were debating in the 1860s during the Reconstruction Amendments, as well as how they, after they did not get the right to vote, what they were actually doing and saying about black men being rapists, saying they needed to be lynched like Rebecca Latimer, people like Charlotte Gilman making arguments about how white women's rightful place was next to white men in colonizing the darker races or the white woman's burden. All of these things show that white women and white feminism has been distinctly different from the projects of racial uplift that black people engaged upon. I think the problem is that if you take gender as an ahistorical category, as if black women have always had this gendered experience and it's always been about their subjugation, then that's just manifestly incorrect, because those terms meant fundamentally different things in the late 1800s and early 1900s than what they meant, post 1960, 1970, after they're written into Title VII of the Civil Rights Movement. So I would caution against revisionism. But when you're talking about somebody like Ida B. Wells, I mean, she was a woman of her day. I mean, initially she believed that black men were rapists until her friend Thomas Moss was killed, and she understood, hey, maybe T. Thomas Fortune's onto something. Maybe lynching is motivated by economic greed and lust for things. These kinds of, this is kind of the leeway that theorists get. They get to imagine a world that's not necessarily true. And in these fields like women and gender studies or philosophy or other liberal arts disciplines, there's not a big emphasis on facts. So you can reimagine and interpret things any way you want and then assert them as true. That's just not the case when you look at the historical record. And it's certainly not the case when you look at black men's involvement in the suffrage movement and their fight against Western imperialism, meaning both white men and white women trying to colonize the world. Black men were the front line, so to speak, against the white man and the white woman's burden at the turn of the century.
I think a big problem, too, that happens is a lot of these black feminists of today try to take white gender theory and then just treat, like they say intersectional is supposed to be race, class, and gender, which is a good idea to analyze all three. But that doesn't necessarily mean that just because you're saying you're going to analyze all three, that you're automatically doing so correctly. And I think that's something that kind of happens. People treat them as if just because they're correctly saying we have to analyze all three, that everything they say after that must be gospel. And
yeah, I don't understand that.
Yes.
I'm a philosopher by training, but just because you say race, class, and gender, I call it the trinity of BS, right? That somehow it's like you utter these words and somehow that means your analysis is magical and complex. And it's not true, because most people don't know anything about the categories they're talking about. I mean, basically it means like, okay, race, class, and gender, poor people, women, and black people or brown people. And that's not a complex analysis. That's just you asserting certain ahistorical categories as if they're true.
Yes.
Right. But you don't know about like if I say I'm studying class between black men and black women, am I talking about unemployment? Am I talking about underemployment? Am I talking about the numbers of hours worked? Am I talking about labor participation? What am I talking about? Am I talking about social mobility, education? These are complex problems that economists constantly are writing about and debating about. Like, there is no answer. Am I talking about a wage gap? Or am I talking about incarceration? Am I taking that into consideration when I talk about the wage gap? Most of the time I'm not, because when you use the Department of Labor statistics that quote the 5 cents differential between black men and black women, they're quoting the average. So they're not taking into consideration that black men work, several hours a week or 0.7 or an hour more than black women a day. So in a given week, they work anywhere from 7 to 15 hours more than black women. They're not taking that into consideration. And we're only talking about 5 cents. You're not talking about unemployment, which black men suffer disproportionately historically. You're not talking about the fact that black men overwhelmingly work blue collar jobs and seasonal employment. There's a whole lot of factors that figure into what you talk about in terms of class. And then take gender. So if you say you're analyzing gender, what are you talking about? Are you talking about poor black men? Are you talking about rich black men? Are you talking about black men with histories of abuse? So if you make the argument that black men abuse black women, are you talking about people with previous trauma? Are you talking about people who were sexually abused? There's so many factors that figure into every category that, people just say these things and they just intuit that, oh, I'm talking about this relationship in this group. But none of that holds true when we look at it empirically. And I think that the studies that have been done by people like, Evelyn Simeon, I think the studies that have been done by Catherine Hornoys, I think the studies that have been done by Noel Kazanev, these studies show that black men simply are not as distinct as black feminists would like to make them when it comes to beliefs about gender, religion, or economics.
And also, they're not as duplicative of white gender dynamics as
they
like to pretend, because there's this kind of fiction that black gender dynamics are perfectly duplicative of white gender dynamics, and all you have to do...
And that's just false.
Yeah. And there's this myth being spread that you just take whatever's happening in the white community between men and women and their history and just reimagine it with some ebonics thrown in, and that's black gender analysis.
Oh, no. Yeah, and that's one of the reasons. There's an article written by a woman named Gooley in 1989. It's a small article. I think it came out in the journal, Western Journal of Black Studies. And, she's trying to analyze, black men and black women's gender attitudes. And she starts off with this long, black feminist analysis about how black women are dual oppression and double jeopardy, and how that means that their views of gender are going to be different. And then when she gets to the end of the article and she tests it, she's like, I was shocked that there's no difference between black men and black women's gender consciousness, that black men are much more gender progressive than white women and white men, and equal to that of black women. And she's like, I was not prepared for that finding. And that finding she found in 1989 had both been found previously in 83 and and there's a study like in 1978, and has been found in every decade since then. So you find that black men and black women are generally have the same gender ideologies and experiences of racism and the notions of sexism and the vulnerability of women. And then in the last few years, you had studies that show that black men were even more progressive than black women on gender. People like Simeon and Hornoys argue this is because black men are raised by black women. My book, of course, argues that the reason that this is the case is because black men have experiences of gendered racism, or what I call anti-black misandry, because they're demonized as non-males or not men within Western patriarchy. So it makes them have a different kind of gender consciousness that one usually attributes to men. And the importance of that is that it shows that because black men have a long history of sexual violence, that's why they're sensitive to these issues. Whereas previous literatures like Hornoys and Simeon theorize that the reason that they have gender consciousness is because women taught them. But when you look at the historical record, you see there's all kinds of complexity that lends itself to understanding why black men would be more sensitive to rape and domestic abuse, et cetera. It's because they experienced the very same things, right? Between 76 and 1990, 1992, black men were the biggest victims of spousal homicide in this country. Nobody ever talks about that. We just pretend that it goes away. But that means that during this period of time where you get all these theories by Ellen Pence and Michael Payamar suggesting that that men in general, beat women for power and domestic abuse is caused by patriarchy, black men were the ones being killed the most, right? Even now. I
just want to interrupt you right there,
sure,
because that's going to be my next question. So I want you to hold that thought, because I'm just going to add something.
Sure.
What you're about to say about is another one of the talking points. When people try to prove that black patriarchy exists, they say, oh, it exists because black men have, and this is a serious sentence that I've heard, the freedom to abuse and rape black women. They run the church, and they're centered in police protests. So to close out the topic, how would you address all those things?
Well, I mean,
I know it's kind of a broad
I don't know.
So
yeah. Well, I mean, look, I think, I would say this. I would say that when you look at the history of rape in black communities, it has been primarily intraracial, meaning that it's been between black people. But there are different phenomena associated with this. One of the things that I study is the history of domestic abuse and sexual assault and violence in our communities. And we're doing different studies about this in terms of, young black males being raped, but you see lots of trauma. So you know, I mean, only in the last 2 years have we really started having conversations about male victims of rape. So we don't have complete numbers. But I'll tell you one of the things that we found when we were writing the article for, called "She Touched Me" with my co-author, Dr. Utley. We found a quote where two white ethnographers went into the black community and they suggested that black men lose their virginity between the ages of 7 and 9 to much older women. When you look at ages of sexual debut in this country, black men or black boys usually lose their virginity before the age of 14, black girls before the age of 17. So the kinds of notions of consent, right, and most of the rapes that we talk about are issues of consent. These rules, they're different rules in our culture. You see statutory rape disproportionately amongst black boys in our culture. You see rape disproportionately in our culture of women in later years. You see high rates of child abuse in our cultures, especially amongst young black boys. Dr. Stacey Patton does excellent work in this area, where black women are the predominant perpetrators of that child abuse. And at the same time, you see disproportionate rates of domestic abuse, where black men disproportionately abuse black women and black women disproportionately abuse black men.
So it's bidirectional.
Yeah, so it's bidirectional, right? Black women have the highest disproportionate, or well, not the highest, because I think indigenous women and men are the highest, but they have a disproportionately high rate of domestic abuse in this country, and black men have a disproportionately high rate of domestic abuse in this country. That is the problem, right? That you have violence in these communities, in the very same community that you will find high rates of domestic abuse, be it men abusing women or women abusing men, you will also have high rates of interpersonal violence, be it homicide and child abuse. So the problem that I often have with the ways that we talk about these issues is that we pretend that these are utopias and there's no economic issues, there's no issues of drug abuse, substance abuse, people going in and out of jail or poverty. And then suddenly men wake up and say, I want to dominate you, and they choose to beat black women. That's not what happens. What happens is you have communities that are strained, where you have neighborhoods full of violence. You have homes that are full of violence, and no one is exempt from that kind of violence. I think the problem is that we've had traditional gender theories under feminism embrace a view of a male only, or males as the primary perpetrator or the only perpetrator of domestic abuse or rape. And that's skewed how we actually interpret the data that shows that these things are bidirectional and that black boys as well as black girls are disproportionately affected by statutory rape or sexual abuse at early ages.
One of my co-hosts has joined us, and he's also a big fan. He was excited that you're going to be here, and he wanted to ask
thank you.
a question. B. Mills, are you there?
Yes, I am. Dr. Curry, it's a pleasure to speak with you. How are you doing this evening?
I'm doing well, sir. I'm doing well.
Good. Glad you can join us. Go ahead, T. Keep going with what you had going. I'm just kind of getting some notes together.
Okay. I heard on the Breakfast Club, which is, very scholarly and informative, that black men are the number 2 killer of black women, and there was no pushback on that. So surely that must be true.
Well, if you have my book, I feel like you just set me up on that one. In chapter 3 of my book, I have a long discussion about intraracial violence, right? And I explain, I specifically attack this statistic because it's never been true. Okay. And it's very important to understand what's being said here. In 2009, Eric Holder made a speech where he said, black men were the number 1 killers or the number 2 killers of black women. And he said that because intimate partner violence is so high in our communities, that intimate partner homicide was responsible for the deaths of God knows how many black women. He didn't give a number. He just said it was the highest killer. That statistic has, it's been refuted, it's been retracted, it's been disavowed by the Department of Justice. So here's the important thing to know. So in the National Intimate Partner Survey in 2010, they made a report and they said that, look, there's an estimated 40.9% or basically 41% of black women, or 6 million black women who will experience intimate partner violence in their lifetime. During that same period of time, they said roughly 36.8 or 37% of black men will experience intimate partner violence in their lifetime. So that's basically, 6 million black women and 4.6 million black men. Okay. When the Department of Labor utilized these statistics, they misread the FBI supplemental report. Because in that supplemental report, it said, oh, intimate partner homicide is the number one killer of black women. But when they went back and looked at the data that they had in that very own report, that's not what it showed. In fact, it showed that the rates of homicide by intimate partner violence was actually pretty small. And here's the reason why. When people report that 20 or 25% of black women are killed by intimate partner homicide, what they're doing is taking the numbers that you get, like in the Violence Against Women report, or that you find in the FBI, expanded homicide data database. And let's say that number is 200. Like in 2014, it was 191. But let's just say, for the sake of argument, it's 200. In a given year, only about 770 to 800 black women die from homicide. So if you have 200 of 800, that's roughly 25%, right? So that's what they're adding up. They're saying that 200 people killed of this small number is 25%. Here's the problem with that, though. When you look at black men, you can have in that same year, say 150 black men get killed. And that number is going to be 3%. Even though it's only 50 or 40 less than black women, black men are killed every year in this country around 6,700 to 7,000. Right. So that means that because black men are killed so much more by homicide, even if those numbers were both equal, their percentage will always be less. So when people are talking about these statistics, or when they're misreading these statistics, what they're trying to do is conflate the number or the percentage of deaths with the actual number of deaths. And that's just false. And Eric Holder did the exact same thing. He misread a report. And he made a claim that it's the leading cause of death of African-American women at the ages 15 to 45. You have now on the Department of Justice website a disclaimer that says that these remarks, which were delivered in 2009, were wrong, that while homicide is a leading cause of death, it is outranked by things like cancer and heart disease. And even when you go back to the initial report, it was a 2003 issue of the National Institute of Justice Journal. In 2014, it was revised, and now it says that homicide is a leading cause of death. It is not the number one cause of death, right? And you can actually see that exact same language in the recent CDC report that everybody's been misinterpreting too. So this was a mistake. It's been cited over and over again as if it's true. But even the original documents and the Department of Justice website, or the Bureau of Justice website, all say that it wasn't true. So given that, I don't know what else one could say about a false statistic.
So here's what astounds me, because the last thing you said about revisions. So this has been explicitly revised in the CDC reports, and it's been explicitly revised on the White House page. But it's
you could actually Google it. Yeah.
That kind of blows my mind, because I feel like for any other group, if something was explicitly revised or had a revocation of the claim, it would be common knowledge for any other group. It's amazing to me that it can be.
Well, black men, right? But black men are written. I mean, this is what I write about in my book, right? So black men are defined by stereotypes, right? I mean, this statistic has never been true, right? The Department of Justice website says that it's never been true. The original National Institute of Justice Journal says it hasn't been true, because it was their report in 2003 that they looked at. You can look at the CDC. The CDC puts out LCODs, which are leading causes of death. And for my book, I went from 1998 to 2013. At no point did homicide rank number one between the ages of 15 and 24, or much less 24 to 45. It's just false, right? Because intimate partner homicide is a subset of homicide. So if homicide is not number one, right, there's no way that intimate partner homicide can be, right? Because it's just a subset of, the relationships of two people that killed each other. So this is just manifestly false. It's never been true. It's manifestly false. It's been rejected. It's been corrected in the original government documents. So the only thing that sustains this, and this is the problem with the Breakfast Club, and I've been very clear on Twitter. I tagged Charlemagne the God, and I said, listen, if you were going to let Jamelia Lemieux and Amber Phillips make up stuff just because they did Google searches, you're responsible as a journalist, if that's what the Breakfast Club calls itself, to investigate it, right? It's your job to fact check what your guests say. And the fact that you didn't do this and you were not prepared to actually dispute this claim when it's been disputed on every government publication for the last 3 or 4 years shows that you don't have an investment in the truth about black men in the black community. Because what you did is you let two black feminists come up there, make a claim about why they're allegedly fighting for black men's rights and Black Lives Matter, but then give it a counterintuitive argument or a counterfactual argument about the demonization and the pathologies of black men and boys. And that's why we need interventions like Black Male Studies to be able to contextualize what's actually being said. Because if we're not going to talk about intimate partner violence beyond black men or perpetrators, then you're allowed to believe things like, well, since we believe only men commit domestic violence, then it's likely that these black men have been killing these black women. But if you had a notion of bidirectionality or any notion of any of the data sets that have been published within the last decade, you would know that's not true. Right. So the CDC actually just released their 2017 updates to the NISVS, the Intimate Partner Violence Survey. And in that survey, it shows that 6.6 million black women are going to be victims of domestic violence over the course of their lifetime, and 5.1 million black men are. It shows that in a 12-month period, black men are actually more likely to be abused by intimate partner violence than black women, because black men's rates are 1.5 million, black women's rates are 1.3 million. So that means that there's these changing dynamics in our communities where black people are abusing each other. Now, that's not to overlook that once fights escalate, right, that black men are more likely to injure black women, and black women also are more likely to utilize knives or guns to equalize the physical disparity. But these are problems that are in our communities that are the functions of previous trauma, the lack of conflict resolution, or certain, drug or substance abuse issues or alcoholism. These are not issues where you have one group of people just systematically exterminating other groups of people. And the important point to remember about this is that anytime we're having this debate, in any given year, we're basically talking about 300 to 400 people. And black men are roughly 30 to 40% of the victims in a given year of intimate partner homicide. So black women now certainly are more, right? But what that translates to, like I said, it could be anywhere from 100, 120 to 200, or 130 to 170. It just depends on the year that you look at. But when you're talking about these same issues in the 1970s and the 1980s, you're talking about 800 black men dying a year, 650 black women dying a year, 700 black men dying a year, 600 black women dying a year, right? The number of victims back then was 1,400. Now we're under 300 or 400, right? So we have to put these things in context. That's not to say that intimate partner violence is not a huge issue in our communities, because it is. But once you control for things like class or economics and poverty, there really is no racial differences between what happens in a white race or the Asian race or the black race. And this has been remarked upon in various studies, that in the black culture, these are mostly class issues, that once you control for class issues, it doesn't become disproportionate to other races. And when you control for gender issues, there are no differences between the genders in terms of frequency. In fact, Hampton published an article, I think back in 2005, where he actually said that the risk of being killed by a spouse was the same for black men and black women. So, this is well remarked upon in the clinical literature looking at domestic violence. It is only when you get to things like liberal arts and you get into these conversations where people don't look at data sets and they don't even trouble themselves to read the secondary literature, that you get these gross misunderstandings of black men being the sole perpetrators and black women being the only victims. We now know that that's not the case. And look, this isn't really an issue about who's beating who or killing who the most. This is really an issue of how we're socializing children within homes into violence. Because one of the things that people like Carolyn West argue is that even a child, male or female, even seeing domestic violence increases their risks of being perpetrators. So that means that if you're in a household with intimate partner violence or abuse, that if your child sees this and they see this as normalized, right, then they're more likely to be practitioners themselves. We're socializing children and future generations into violence, and nobody wants to talk about that because they want to play these imaginary identity politics games that has no basis whatsoever in fact or numbers. And it's a very dangerous game to play because the reason that we don't have the kind of complex understanding about domestic violence that we need to actually intervene and help our own community is because you have people reading books by English professors telling them what domestic violence is, instead of reading the articles of epidemiologists and social workers saying, here's the problem in our communities. Let's develop theories that actually address those actual problems.
D, are you ready with your question?
Dr. Curry, you mentioned earlier regarding bidirectional violence between black men and black women. Was there any statistics that showed like what initiated the violence or which group initiated the initial confrontation?
There is a summary that Carolyn West wrote about intimate partner violence in ethnic minority communities, where she talks about the different types of violence, where majority of it is hitting, yelling, physical and psychological abuse. And she has a study that she cites in there. I can't remember the name of it, but I remember she cites a self-report study where she says men and women agree that black women usually hit first. But I haven't looked at that data set for that study in a while, so I can't, off the top of my head, I don't remember the methods of it. But that has been reported, and I know that's similar to some other stuff that's been reported in Catino's work, etc. But at the same time, who hits first? This is the problem in our communities. Even if women hit first, which is what I think some of these authors suggest. Well, that's certainly the case in dating violence, actually. In when people are dating. But regardless, the issue is twofold. One, even if women hit first, when it escalates, women get hurt more, right?
Exactly.
Because of the strength differential.
Yes.
And if the violence is severe, once it escalates to severe violence, then black men are likely to be killed or stabbed. So The problem is that once you go down this road and this becomes cyclical and it keeps escalating, either black women get hurt or killed, or black men get killed. Right? So this is the issue isn't really, and this is what I'm constantly saying, trying to get people to understand, even on my Facebook page. The issue isn't who you're trying to blame. The problem is the dynamic starts. Right? Because you only view men as perpetrators, that means that you ignore all these cyclical ranges of violence that cause men to escalate, that cause women to get injured. There's no conflict resolution on the side of women. There's not removing men from these environments. There's no treatment. Right? You've created a dynamic where you only see half of the problem, and then you blame the whole situation on one group. Like if we have,
go ahead.
It is. No, but you're absolutely right. It's impossible to get to the core. Yeah. Exactly. Because if you have a violent mother who's beating a man and you take the man out the house and he's the victim, right, you can't ever introduce him back. And that means that same black woman who's being violent to him could also be violent to children, right? Because there's no sinners. He has no way to deal with the trauma. So what happens when he gets in his next relationship? Or what happens if he's the young boy looking at his mother beating his father? What is he going to do when he gets in a relationship with women?
It becomes normalized, and then he carries
it becomes normalized. Exactly. So it's an intergenerational reproduction of trauma and violence that no one wants to theorize about because we want to play identity politics, right? And then when you have somebody come in and is like, listen, here's the data. Stop just blaming poor black men, right? And I'm not the first person to say this. Like, there's tons of research that shows that black men are not more culturally disposed to committing intimate partner violence. Like this is the irony. Social scientists would never make such a claim because it would violate their IRB and the ethics of their field because they have to use evidence. But because there are no IRBs and you don't study anything in liberal arts, we make these outrageous claims all the time. So you have this schism where you can't find this argument when you go look at the race literature specifically. In fact, there was a guy who was from the UK that wrote a book, and in the introduction he said that black women in the UK fundamentally believe that black men are more violent than white men. But he's like, there is no way that I'm putting that in my book because there's no way that I could possibly test that. Right. And he's like, I'm not trying to kill my career. So he has this whole page where he's discussing this perception that black women have in the UK. about black men being more violent than white men. And he's like, but it doesn't make sense numerically because the rates of abuse, even though they're disproportionate, aren't on the one side of black men. Because in the UK, they actually study bidirectionality because they accept that women perpetrate domestic violence against men. Their laws about that have been on the books since the mid 90s. I think 1994 is when they started passing on the laws and protections of domestic abuse for men. So they're a whole decade or two ahead of us in terms of how they've recognized female perpetration. Right. And that's why their literature, like when you look at the domestic violence literature written by people from the UK, it looks very different than the literature that's written about domestic violence in the United States, because the United States has not done a great job at talking about female perpetration. You see the same thing in other countries. I think Australia just had an issue because the government funded a feminist project that talked about stopping patriarchy. And there was this huge backlash from scholars saying, why are you funding this? We know empirically this doesn't work because men are not the primary or the only perpetrators of violence, domestically in terms of intimate partner conflict. So there's pushback on it, but the cultural frame largely introduced by feminism in the early 1980s is still that patriarchy causes domestic abuse. For black people and other minorities, this is much more of an economic problem. It's much more of a structural problem. And all the evidence and I think data really suggests that, because if you look in the last 10 to 15 years, every article I've read by black social workers, et cetera, talk about the disproportionate effect it has on black women, but by no means does it conceptualize black men as the only perpetrators.
Wow, that's amazing. So I wanted to ask you this, Dr. Curry, just to following up on that. So culturally, this seems like it's becoming one of those issues that's kind of like a hot coal. Nobody really wants to touch it. Where do you see it trending in terms of academia? Do you see people wanting to devote resources into studying these issues more and getting the information out so it can be digestible for the public? Or do you see people kind of shying away from the research here in the States? Where do you see it trending?
I think like anything else, this is going to be a fight. With most paradigm changes, and this is what Black male studies brings to the table. I think Black feminism still holds a male-only view of domestic violence perpetration, and I think that Black male studies scholars who are doing empirical work, that are sensitive to clinical findings, who are open to various types of empirical testing, be it quantitative or qualitative, will have to push back on this. And this isn't anything new. This is what happened a decade ago in the UK. This is what happened when Connell was challenged with her theory of hegemonic masculinity by economists and sociologists. There has to be empirical tests of Black men and Black male culture in this country. And I think that once you start getting the stories, when you start collecting the experiences like we did in our article on statutory rape or young Black men's sexual experiences, that you're going to find a very different picture than mainstream feminist theory. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's not to say that it has to be the end of Black feminism or anything like that. But it is to say that the anti-empirical claims or the misandric claims, which assume that Black men and boys are pathological, have to be challenged. Now, is this going to be picked up in the mainstream? Who knows? But will it produce a literature that will give a different side that's informed by empirical facts and not just assertions about the character and the character and the behavior of Black men and boys in this country? Absolutely. Right. And I think that's all we could kind of anticipate. It will certainly start a debate. It will certainly push a field forward. Will there be hurt feelings and eggs crack, so to speak? Absolutely. But we're talking about the humanity of a whole community here. We're talking about the character of a whole group of people who have been demonized for no reason.
Stereotypes being perpetrated.
It is dangerous stereotypes. It's very dangerous stereotypes. And I try to put this in context. I was recently at a conference on race and gender in St. Louis, and I said, "Listen, it's like in 2014, there were 12.1 million adult Black men in this country." Right. So Black men over the ages of 18, 12.1 million. I was like, in that same year, the Violence Against Women report on page 6 and 7 said that there were 191 Black women who were victims of intimate partner homicide by a Black man. And I said and this is single offender, single perpetrator, right? Single offender, single victim. I'm sorry. So that means that there are 191 Black men that killed 191 Black women. Now, I asked the audience, I was like, you understand that this is 1/1,000,000th of the number of adult Black men in the population. I was like, so the number of Black men who actually killed a spouse, a girlfriend, etc., or ex-girlfriend or ex-spouse, is less than 0.5% of the total adult population. Now the whole population is like 18.9 million or something like that. But in terms of the adult population, 12.1 over the ages of 18, that's less than 0.5%. I was like, and what you're telling me is I should endorse a theory that leaves the 99.999% untouched and take seriously your argument that black men want to dominate and kill black women when they're less than 0.5%. And I asked them, what other group would you do that for? What other group would you say that we're going to base our whole theory on the less than 1% of the group? And I said, I'll even give you the credit. I was like, so let's say that you want to look at the perpetration rates, right? You want to look at the perpetration rates in a given year. That's 1.3, assuming that's single offender, right? That's still not a huge. That's not half of the percentage.
Right.
Let's say you want to look at the number of black men who are incarcerated. That's 6.7%. It's less than 7%. So that means that over 93% of most black men have not been in jail, have not had a run-in with the law, and that's adult black men. So that means that over 93% of adult black men have not been incarcerated.
Right.
And you want me to base my theories about your intuitions, your stereotypes, your negative interactions with black men that's based on either 0.5% or 7% or 6% of the population.
Right.
Why would I do that?
Right.
And that's all black. You see, that's what I'm saying. This is why Black Male Studies says that there has to be a level of empiricism invested in how you're talking about black men and boys. Because if the argument is going to be that we can conceptualize black masculinity as its derelictions and its pathologies, then that means that you get to take that one experience of a black man being violent towards a woman, or the one experience of a black man being homophobic, and say that small percent represents the whole group. And now I'm ignoring the fact that black men are gender progressive. Now I'm ignoring the fact that black men, while they may be homophobic, they're not more homophobic. They're generally no more homophobic than black women, but they're less homonegative because they view gay people as civil rights as a minority group. I'm ignoring the fact that black men have created extended networks of fathering. That they, a good friend of mine, Siri McDougal, does this great piece on social fathering. That black men extend themselves to other members and families in our communities whose fathers may have been killed or locked up because there's a shortage of men. We ignore the fact that black men, even when they're not with mothers, have more hours with their children or are more involved with their children than any other race. We ignore the fact that there's so many positive things about black men and boys that we have to ignore if we take up some of these tropes of black feminism.
Yes.
And that's not to say that all black feminism is bad. But it's to say that when black feminism evaluates black men, there's a huge gap in what it takes to be his theory and the actual reality and the lived experience of black men in this country. So Black Male Studies builds from that experience and theorizing from the experience of black men and boys in this country. What does it mean to be a black father? What does a black boy think about in becoming a black man? What is the problem of death or eschatology in the maturation of black boys to black men in this country? What is the idea of the present, given that black men have the lowest life expectancy in the United States? These are questions that we need to ask about being socialized and being developed and maturing into black males that we never get the chance to ask because so much of our theorization is built on pathological characters from The Color Purple or from Beloved, right? That don't take into consideration what we've actually done. We'll look at a damn movie about black men and use that as the basis of theory instead of going out and talking to black men who are living right in front of us.
Something that I've encountered myself, and this might be more of a rant than a question, so, excuse me beforehand, but I've been reading your work for a while because I go to academia.edu and I like to pull up your studies. You have a lot of them, and I don't think I've even put a dent in them. I don't know how many you have. You put them up faster than I can read them, to be honest. But I've educated myself based on your studies. So I'll be on Twitter or something, and I'll put some things that I've gotten from reading your work, and I'll even put like citations, not only to your work, but also to other scholars' work, because a lot of your work leads to other scholars. So I'll put stuff up there. I'll put stuff from other scholars too, like There's a paper by Valethia Watkins. It's called Contested
Yes,
Memories,
yes.
a critical analysis of the Black
Hmm.
feminist revisionist history project. And it talks about how a lot of people in the past that intersectional feminists try to claim as part of their intellectual lineage had nothing to do with them. No, a lot of stuff. And then a white liberal, sometimes it'll even be a journalist, somebody respected, will be like, that's wrong. And despite all this
Yeah.
stuff that I put, and then I'll be like, what do you mean that's wrong? And they'll be like, well, you should try to follow and read Feminista Jones. And, maybe you might learn something. And
I'm, well, I don't follow tweet. I don't follow
yeah,
Twitter people.
but
I don't follow. I don't get my
but
information from
that's
Twitter.
that's what I mean. The fact that it's perfectly rational to them to proffer that as a response to everything that I will have shown them based on your research, and to them it's similar to the Rod Dreher thing. Just the same way that Rod Dreher can just be considered automatically valid to scholars and sociologists who have hard data. I noticed that a lot of pop feminists, Jamila Lemieux in the Breakfast Club, I'll see a distinguished white liberal come at me with that in response to, serious scholarship that I'm
Yeah.
putting
Well,
up. And what I want to know is, why do you think that a lot of these white liberals who are supposed to be considered by many as, progressive, as sympathetic to black people, as the allies, a lot of them will call themselves, allies, they're part of that white ally industrial complex, but they're so willing to give equal weight to talking points that aren't that different than what white supremacists have been saying about black men for
well,
years.
but I think that's exactly it. I mean, I think that's exactly the issue, right? One of the things, you know, my criticism, let me say it this way. There is a concept, and I actually agree with Philippe, Dr. Watkins on this point. We had a long conversation a few years ago at ASCAC. I think that black feminism has become hegemonic in the sense that it is the Cliff Notes version of everything that stands in for gender. Now, that is not to say that I do not believe that black women should study themselves or they can use black feminism for whatever they want. I mean, they're certainly within the right to do that. But I think the problem is that it has become a set of ideas that are uncontestable. And because of that, you have this negativity about black men and boys that does not allow us to understand how those stereotypes merely repeat what white supremacists have said. And I'll give you two very quick examples of this. In 1867, one of the arguments that Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton waged against black men was that they were of a lower order of men. So there was a debate on the floor of the Missouri Senate where a law student said that black men were a tyrannical class, that if they got the right to vote, if they got any freedoms above women, they would abuse women, they would whip them, they would rape them, and they would beat them. Okay? 100 years later, in a little over 100 years later, in the 1970s, you had Michelle Wallace make basically the same argument that suggested that because black men had got civil rights, that they were going to turn away from black women, that they were inherently misogynistic, that they would become more violent, right? That they would choose white women at black women's expense. Then you had 1982, you had Bell Hooks, write her Anti-Woman, and a few years later followed up with her book on Marginless Center and Black Rage, where she created the idea of phallocentrism, borrowing from Michelle Wallace, that argued the same kind of thing. And she defined, domestic abuse as patriarchal power that black men would yield because they were deprived of certain rights in society. Now, of those theories that were developed to describe black men, all of them depended either on the allusion to black men being violent once they got civil rights that was started by white suffragists in the 1860s, or they alluded to the idea of black men being hypermasculine, which was a dominant theory of black men from the 1950s to 1988, which suggested that because black men did not have fathers in the homes, they imitated their mothers. So they suffered from a female personality disorder. And because of that, they became more delinquent, rejected all that was feminine, and had excess masculinity, or at least performed excess masculinity. Now, both of those two dominant theories, which we take to be many of the bases of intersectional and black feminism, were based in racist social science, or at least they have a corollary in racist social science.
As far as races go. Yeah.
And centuries old. Right. That's what I'm saying. Like this is what I mean about doing the intellectual history and the genealogy of some of these terms and these ideas. So the same time you had in the 1960s, 70s, and 80s, white men conducting studies. Like this wasn't a stereotype. Like I actually have the studies by people like Kusamo and Pender Hughes and all these people where they're actually saying that black men were more feminine than white men and more delinquent on that basis. Right. And this is being written at the same time that black feminists are adopting the term of hypermasculinity. Now, does that mean that black feminism has to be thrown out completely? I don't know. But I know that that means that at least the theories they have about black men have to be seriously questioned and revamped. But because people say that if you question black feminism, then you're a sexist, misogynist, etc., that means that they're allowed to hold pathological views of black men rooted in racist social sciences that black men don't have the ability to question.
Yes. You can't even question.
So we continue these. Yeah, you can't question. You can't ask questions. You can't present different research.
Even if it's a basic question. Even if you say something like, well, okay, so you're saying hypermasculinity, but what does healthy black male masculinity look like? And no one seems to be able to answer that question.
No, they're just like, you have to be feminist.
No, you can't even ask them to back up a point. Like, for example, they'll be like, well, that's wrong. You need to read. I'm like, okay, give me something to read. Oh, I'm not here to do your homework for you. Like, they will literally... Yeah, they will literally Google it. It's like, okay, wait a minute. You came to me telling me that I need to learn, and I'm asking you, what do I learn? And you know, I even made a term for this. What this phenomenon you described, like the same way there's money laundering. What they have become, they've created an industry of thought laundering. They've taken, like they wash white supremacist thoughts and make them clean for white liberals to now parrot. A white liberal can't say it and source a white supremacist, even though white supremacists have been saying these things for hundreds of years. But now these black feminists come, they legitimize it to a degree. They do the thought laundering. After they do the thought laundering, they wash it, they pass it off to the white liberals, and now it's suddenly in the New York Times or it's in all these respectable publications.
No, I think there's certainly, I can't disagree with that. I think that's true. I think there's certainly a practice where that does happen. I don't think it's all, because like I use some of the works that like Evelyn Simeon, right? I use the empiricists, right? I mean, they do studies on this stuff, and, I think their studies are correct, not because it agrees, but because they actually have evidence. So I think that are there people who use black feminism to launder pathological thoughts and sell it to liberals? Absolutely. Right. And we've known that for a long time. Ishmael Reed's made this point. Stuart Hall made this point about standpoint epistemology and identity politics. Lots of people made that. Sylvia Winter made this point. Carol Boyce Davies made this point. So there are lots of other black women, some of which identify as feminists, that have made this point. The problem is that they have not provided an alternative to how we should interpret black men. And that's where I think black male studies intervenes, right? Exactly. That we have to recognize that there is some of this going on under the rubric of black feminism that is certainly pathological, that is certainly anti-empirical, that is stereotypical, and there has to be a corrective for it. And listen, I know, because I don't call myself a feminist, right? By any stretch of the imagination, because I read this stuff. There's no way I could endorse feminism given the history I know of it. But if we're talking about things like, there being interventions, there being laws and political strategies for the equality of women, absolutely. And that's well within the tradition of what black men have always argued. Since the National Negro Conventions to W.B. Du Bois, even farther, right? So, for me, the point of black maleness doesn't have any of the assumptions that white hegemonic masculinity has with it. And again, this is why I think that we have to start holding black feminist theorists accountable, because they'll say black men have toxic masculinity or hegemonic masculinity, but then they don't know Connell. They haven't read Connell. So, I'll give you a great example. Like I recently had a situation where I was invited to write a piece for a feminist venue on my book. And I cited R.W.S. Connell's work on hegemonic masculinity and subordinate masculinities. The editor of the venue came back and said, well, this is anti-woman. And I'm like, how is this anti-woman? Y'all use hegemonic masculinity all the time. So is it anti-woman because Connell herself makes the argument that ethnic minority men are one of the biggest, have historically been the biggest challengers to patriarchy? I'm like, well, if you're offended by that, then it shows that you haven't done the work to get into the readings, right? That's not an issue of ideology. That's an issue of you haven't read the whole book. So I'm not responsible for that. So, when you do this kind of work, you're going to be shut out of things. People are going to say nasty things about you. They're not going to look at evidence. They're going to call you a sexist. I'm a black man, so it just fits with the stereotypes of the day. But that is the same move that white people make. That is the same arguments that white people advance. It has nothing to do with the facts of the matter. It has everything to do with the positionality of the body that's doing the speaking. And because black men are so underrepresented, because they're so criminalized, that's what you're going to get even by some of these middle class black feminists in the academy. But that's important to highlight that this is not generally what black women think. Black women are in our communities suffering alongside black men. Black women are in our communities dealing with the effects of black male death and black male incarceration. Black women are still dealing with the issues of dependency on the children that we leave behind when people kill us. So this is black male studies is a much longer conversation than just black men as, atomistic individuals or beings. What we're trying to talk about is the effect of the loss of black men on the black community, the kinds of trauma that black people and black communities suffer when black men are surveilled by the cops, the risk that the targeting and racial profiling of black men lead to when black women are involved. And I mean, a great case of that would be someone like Antonio Cross and Rekia Boyd. Rekia Boyd was shot in the head, not because the cop was aiming for her, but because he was trying to shoot Antonio Cross. So the effects of a black male demonization or black men being deathbound is that black women are often the collateral damage to the attempts to kill black men. You see the same thing with Ayanna Stanley. Right? Black women are killed by their associations with black men because black men are being haunted in these impoverished urban areas and centers. So black male studies tries to expand a concept of black men and their relationship with the black community in ways that I don't think black feminism is currently doing. And that's not to say that there aren't individual black feminists that do some of this work, but it's to say that it's not yet a hallmark, and black male experience has not been situated at the center of how we should understand black men and boys. And I think when you look at something like police brutality and the attempts that certain intersectional feminists have done to try to get attention away from poor working class men being killed, you can see that issue. You can see that we're not even we're just a little over halfway through the year, and 120 black men have been killed. I think 4 or 5 black women have been killed, and that's not off pace for most of the years under question. Black men overwhelmingly get killed around 290, 300 times, and black women sometimes 9, sometimes 15. The most I've ever seen was like 20 in a given year. So there's a huge disparity there, and if the argument's going to be we're tired of talking about black men, we don't want to talk about their oppression anymore, that's just dehumanizing, right? Because we don't make that argument for anyone else. We don't say we're tired of talking about the Holocaust. We don't say we're tired of talking about domestic abuse against women. No, but you say, but we're tired of talking about black men being killed. That's not a position that black males, be they men or boys or in the academy or out, can accept, because their actual lives, their humanity is at stake in the refusal to see their suffering and recognize their death beyond their raw numbers or how people could use it for their Twitter or hashtag campaign. So,
Dr. Curry, we went a little longer than I had planned. I have one last question. I don't know. D,
yes,
do you have any more questions?
You know what? I had a series of questions that I wanted to ask, but Dr. Curry just, man, he hit on everything that I wanted to really discuss.
Okay.
So, I mean, I'm good, man.
Okay. So in that case, I'll just ask my last question. And you actually kind of hinted at it. One of the problems I have is that because I feel like I get disproportionate representation of intersectional feminism from these pop feminists or these blogger feminists or these prestige media feminists, like from BuzzFeed or Essence or Ebony.com, I'm worried that maybe I'm not getting a fair representation of the full roots of intersectional feminism. So what I wanted to ask you is, it's kind of a 2-part question. A, do these Jamila Lemieux and Feminista Jones type that, run around the liberal media spreading these pathological talking points about black men, first, to what extent do they represent the roots, the academic roots of intersectional feminism or misrepresent them? And if they do misrepresent them, then the second part of my question is, are there some good intersectional feminist works that you feel um, better have better scholarship, have more to learn from? I want to give a little bit of devil's advocate, and
Sure. Sure. No, that's fine. Listen, I read tons of intersectionality. I disagree with all of it, but I read tons of it because in my work, especially being a black man doing this kind of work, people will always say, "Well, you don't understand X," right? So I read Kimberly Crenshaw. I've read, you know, Patricia Hill Collins. I've read Surma Blige. I read all of them. I don't know. So let me stay here. I think Jamelia Lemieux and Amber Phillips represent the kind of pop culture feminism that utilizes hashtags for their own political agendas. So that is not going to
yes.
be the same as academic feminism. That being said, you will find very similar arguments that they make in some of the work of like Kimberly Crenshaw, in the work of Frank Rudy Cooper, right? Those people have very similar ideas because, like Frank Rudy Cooper's book on bipolar masculinity doesn't read all accountable. He just creates like footnotes, like he's like, oh, here's hegemonic masculinity. Here's what Michael Kamel says it is. But he never gets into any of the distinctions or any of the amendments that Connell makes after the 2002 book, or even in the late 90s when she's saying, oh, I have to rethink what I wrote in Gender and Power. There's a lack of depth even in some of those intersectional works. But then again, like when I read Patricia Hill Collins, for the most part, I agree with what Patricia Hill Collins says. I just disagree with the way that she reads black men. Like if you do intersectionality and there's a kind of empiricism to it, then I think that that's the way to go. The problem is when people like Simeon and Hornoys have tested Patricia Hill Collins' standpoint epistemology, it doesn't come out that black women have it. It comes out that black people have it because black men have the same kind of gender consciousness that black women do. Right. So it's one of those things where, because she's doing intersectionality, she makes a theoretical claim that black women have this unique standpoint. But then when you empirically test it, black women don't have this unique standpoint. They share it with black men, et cetera. So, and I think that's a finding that you also find in Michael Dawson's work. I think that's what you find in Evelyn's work. I think you find that in, Horner's work. So it's kind of a torn situation. Like if there's a version of intersectionality I prefer, it would certainly be, Patricia Hill Collins' version. But do I believe in what she says about black men and this unique perspective of black women? No, because every time we test black men, it comes out to be something completely different. And even if you read people like Anthony LaMelle Jr.'s book and, Robert Staples' old book on black masculinity, you find out that black men have historically had different views about gender and sexuality than white men had. So it's hard. It's I'm trying to explain, like it's complex, right? That there's stuff that if you wanted to do intersectionality, that there's certain variations of it that I think are more than tenable to do. But ultimately, do I think intersectionality is true? The answer is no, because every time we test it, or when you have a competing theory like social dominance, right? And this is the theory that I use, social dominance, and I'm moving into other works like gendercide and genocide studies, because of the stuff that I was doing with the Shoah Foundation. Intersectionality just is not persuasive when you're looking at subordinate males or non-combatant battle-aged males within low warfare or genocidal conditions. There's better theories to explain black men that are written by black men, specifically tailored and empirical, that intersectionality just can't refute. In fact, one of the reasons they came up with intersectional visibility is precisely because the evidence by social dominance theorists were so overwhelming that they were like, well, we can't refute this. It's just the case that racialized men or subordinate men in patriarchal societies are more targeted for direct oppression and lethal violence. That's just the fact. Right. And if you test it empirically in homicide, life expectancy, discrimination, employment, the things just keep adding up, and it's just false. Right. It's just true that black men are killed more in patriarchal societies and they experience more harsher forms of discrimination. So once you concede that, I don't understand the need to argue back and forth about what intersectional analysis breeds, especially since intersectionality argues things like black men are privileged, disadvantaged categories. I don't know what that means. If I'm dying more than you and I have a shorter life expectancy and I'm more impoverished and I'm less educated, what is my privilege besides whatever you say at an individual level? Because in all the demographic categories, I'm worse off as a group.
That rings so true for me because I feel like there's almost a place of disingenuousness that a lot of these people come from, and I wonder if you feel the same way when you
No,
engage
absolutely,
in academic
absolutely.
spaces. Because if you come to a conversation and you're using statistics that are being conflated with other data sets, you're speaking in generalizations, you're using conflicting data sets, on and on and on. And so it's almost impossible to come to it from a place of genuine conversation and debate because it seems like the people who you want to have the conversation with are constantly moving the goalposts. They're using incorrect information and they don't want to correct it when you present the data. They'll just say, okay, you need to have anecdotal, you can listen to these anecdotes. You need
And
to
you're
talk
also
to
assumed
black
to
women.
be
Or
misogynist just for questioning the dogma to begin with. So you already have it biased against you.
Yeah, that's always going to be part of the conversation, right? And you're absolutely right. Like because I'm saying like, look, let's talk apples to apples, oranges to oranges. So if you want to talk about black men having an advantage, tell me what group of black men, tell me where, and tell me the comparison group. So if you say black men make more money than black women, okay, are you talking about educated black men? Are you talking about poor black men? What are you talking about? Right? Are you talking about yearly income? Because most of the studies, I think the BGS report said that it's like between 24 and 26,000 per year versus 27 to 29,000, right? I mean, you're talking about these super small numbers. You're talking about like differences in a year of $2,000 to $3,000. So like, I don't know what that means in terms of privilege, right? I just don't. Like, and nobody's been able to tell me. So I just kind of say, okay, well, here's the numbers. You clearly can't move in a different neighborhood with $3,000, so I don't know what they mean in terms of that. And then black men have worse health outcomes than black women in these conditions, like prostate cancer, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, and shorter lifespans. So I don't know. I just don't know what we're arguing about, if I'm going to be quite honest with you. I don't know what the concept of black male privilege means, given that black men have so many disadvantages compared to their female counterpart. And then when they say, well, it's because you're male, then, that's when I'm saying, okay, well, now let's get into the studies, right? If the argument is going to be we have to test the advantages or disadvantages of maleness, then let's compare intersectionality's test to social dominance theory, and nobody wants to have that argument because they haven't read social dominance theory, right? Or I say, let's compare, unemployment like, Becky Pettit's work on invisible men. Let's compare the rates of incarceration and the effects that has on employment. Or Ellen Patterson's work about, viable years of work. There's tons of people that do this work. So it's like I said, it's kind of like you're having a conversation and people say these things and you're trying to have an actual conversation with them about the findings, but they can't because it's an ideological position. It's not one based in fact.
Yes.
And I mean, when you have, black men
around this time
brown men.
It's around this time that the insults start getting hurled.
Yeah.
It's about that time, right?
Yeah.
Become trash.
But I'm not. Yeah, but you can't. But you're not going to win an argument, And people, and listen, I'll speak from experience. People call me all kind of names, right? There are people who say that I hate women. There are people who say that I'm misogynist. There are people who say I antagonize them. But I think that anytime you actually look at what's coming through on Twitter or you look on my Facebook page, I'm not the one that's really insulting people.
No,
you know what I'm saying? I'm the person that says, "Here's a study. You don't believe me? Here's the page. Look it up for yourself." Right?
You're trash.
Here's my book. Yeah, and that's what I like. I've been in there's tons of people. There are people that start pages, conversations about me on other pages. People I don't even know really, and they're like, "Well, Tommy Curry is trash."
Well, trash is
Right.
We actually started calling those people BMATs, for short for black men are trash, because if you just search black men trash, it just goes on forever on Twitter, and it's all these same black feminists who also want to keep telling you we're on the front lines fighting for you. But
you can't be on the front lines fighting for black men if you're dehumanized.
But that's the problem. They fight for dead black men, but the living ones.
But it really seriously, this is an important point. This is the problem. See, because these same black feminists that are living up this kind of social justice aspect will say that they fight for black men, but they can't embrace the life of black men.
No, the living ones are.
So you're fine when they're dead.
Yeah, the living ones are pathological.
When black men are dead. Exactly. But when you actually have to interact with them, you're like, they're pathological, they're trash, etc. Yeah.
The violence perpetrated against the black body for them becomes a commodity to a degree.
Absolutely.
They find a way to make it a commodity. That's what's so disgusting about this whole thing, because they will say things like, "We're fighting on the front lines for you." Yeah, I'm dead already. You know, what are you fighting for exactly? I've died, and then next week there's going to be another one just like me that died.
Well, yeah,
And
but this is how
it
black men are
constantly amazes
exploited.
me.
One last thing I want to talk about. I know a lot of people are going to ask me this. They're going to say, "Oh, what's this book that he mentioned? What's this article he mentioned?" What I'm going to say is, Dr. Curry's book, The ManNot, everything that he has mentioned and then some is in the footnotes to this book. There's over 30 pages of small, fine print, links, footnotes, citations, just by his book. And I want to give you the chance to tell people about your book and what you want them to take away from it. And it's a book I highly recommend.
Oh yeah. No, well, first off, thank you. The ManNot was written to humanize black men and boys, right? And given that we're in a kind of gender politic now, where anything written about black men is considered to be anti-black woman, people are inevitably going to get that story. But I think that when you read the book, you'll see that the argument is with racist white theories and pathological black feminist theories that deprive black men of the kind of sociality that they deserve. So one of the points I make in the book is that black men are seen as ontologically evil. So anything that happens in the real world is just the sociological manifestation of that assumption. But if we look at black men sociologically, as if they're good people that happen to be corrupted or endangered by their social environment, then we get a vastly different picture of what black men are suffering from. Said differently, if we assume that black men and boys are actually affected by trauma, that black men and boys are actually affected by the violence they see, that black men and boys are disturbed by seeing people killed around them, be it their friends or maybe their own lives being threatened, then we see a view of black men that makes them human. Human in the sense that there's a potentiality for something different than the confines of nothingness, which we believe they are right now. And that's why I say black men are unthought, that black men are intuitively asserted to be boogeymen. And we don't think about how they actually live out their lives under white supremacy. So we view black men as having no positive responses or reactions to white supremacy. We view them as negations. We define them by their lack. Because they're not men, they oppress everyone to be men. But black women are oppressed, and they come up with intersectionality. They come up with kitchen conversations. They come up with positive resistance. And all the same time that we're having these conversations, we forget that black men, enslaved black men who couldn't read, sacrificed their lives in wars to try to get black people free. That these same black men that fought for the United States for democracy in foreign countries came back to the United States and fought here. We forget that black men gave their lives trying to protect their wives and their families. We forget that black men were amongst the first black people to introduce the idea of equality in the history of the West. And the reason that we do that is because we define black men by the stereotypes that we imagine them to be, rather than the lived experience that they've demonstrated throughout history. So the ManNot is trying to reclaim that. It's trying to give us a piece and a sensibility of how black men are vulnerable, and then how that problem of being a black male generates new kinds of theories that we could actually build from for liberation.
Well, wonderfully said. I think that's a great note to end on. Gentlemen, thank you for this conversation. It was everything I was hoping it was going to be and then some. Dr. Curry, congratulations on your full professorship. I know.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Yes, you definitely deserve it. And
oh yes, absolutely. Congratulations.
Yes. And yeah, I think that's it. I think that's a wrap. And everyone, be good and be good to each other. Dr. Curry, take care. D, as always, a pleasure. And I think we'll sign up there.
Thank you for having me, bro.
Okay. Bye.